My name's Judy, I'm an architect by trade, and for years, that's all I cared about. Big buildings, fancy complexes, you name it, I designed it. And let me tell you, the money was good. Real good. I was all about my career, you know? Climbing that ladder, making a name for myself. And I did it, too. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I was at the top of my game. But something was missing. One day, I'm sitting in my fancy office, looking out over the city skyline I helped shape, and it hit me. I wanted a family, kids, a husband, the whole shebang. So there I was, 35 years old, and suddenly on the hunt for Mr. Right. And wouldn't you know it, I found him. We got married pretty quick. Tom, he was different from the guys I usually went for. He wasn't all about the money or the status. He was just real. One night, we're sitting on our tiny apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, when Tom turns to me and says, "Hey, Jude," yeah, he called me that, like the Beatles song, "Why don't you design us a house? Your dream house. We'll get some builders, make it happen." Design our own house? It was like he'd read my mind. I'd spent years designing other people's dreams, but never my own. I was all over that idea like white on rice. So I got to work. Sketches, plans, 3D models, the works. We built that house, and it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Open plan living area, huge windows to let in all that natural light, a kitchen that would make a celebrity chef jealous. It was us, in brick and mortar form. I was so proud of that house, I sent some photos to this fancy design magazine. Next thing I know, they're calling it the house of the year. Can you believe that? My house, our house, the best of the year. Life was good, you know? We had our dream house, our careers were going great. But something was still missing. We wanted a kid. We tried everything, tracking my cycle, special diets, you name it. Nothing. So we started with the doctors. Tests, and even more tests. But they all said the same thing, we were fine. We talked about other options. Adoption, IVF, all that stuff. But it didn't feel right for us. We decided if it happened, it happened. If not, well, we had each other, right? So we tried to move on. Focused on our careers, on each other. We traveled, we entertained, we lived. Little did I know, life was about to throw us another curveball. One that would change everything. It started with Tom feeling a bit off. Nothing major, just tired all the time, no appetite. We figured it was stress from work or something. But it didn't go away. We finally went to the doctor. I remember sitting in that sterile white room, holding Tom's hand as the doc came in. The look on his face. I knew it wasn't good news. Stomach cancer. Advanced. Those words hit like a freight train. From that moment on, our lives became a whirlwind of hospitals, doctors, and treatments. I threw myself into it, researching every possible cure, every experimental treatment. We traveled to the best clinics, spent a fortune on medicines. But cancer, it's a sneaky bastard. No matter what we tried, Tom just kept getting worse. I watched the man I loved, this strong, vibrant guy, waste away before my eyes. It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The end came faster than we expected. One minute he was there, squeezing my hand, telling me it would be okay. The next, he was gone. I was lost. Completely and utterly lost. The house that we'd built together, our dream home, it felt empty now. I tried to keep it together, I really did. But I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Work became impossible. I'd stare at blueprints for hours and not see a thing. My colleagues were worried, I could tell. But what could they do? What could anyone do? About a month after the funeral, I started feeling sick. Really sick. Couldn't keep anything down, not even water. At first, I thought it was just stress, you know? Grief does weird things to your body. But then this crazy thought hit me. What if I had cancer too? I know it sounds nuts. I mean, logically, I knew stomach cancer wasn't contagious. But grief isn't logical, is it? I panicked. Drove myself to the ER in the middle of the night, convinced I was dying. The doctors there, bless 'em, they were patient with me. Ran a bunch of tests to calm me down. And then the doc came in with the results. I braced myself for the worst. But instead, she smiled at me. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant." Pregnant. After all those years of trying, after losing Tom, after everything. I was pregnant. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. Right there in the ER, surrounded by beeping machines and worried nurses, I laughed and cried like a crazy person. As I drove home that night, my hand on my still flat stomach, I made a promise. To myself, to Tom, to this little life growing inside me. I was going to be the best damn mom I could be. The pregnancy hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'd heard stories about morning sickness and all that, but this? This was something else entirely. I could barely drag myself out of bed most days, let alone work on complex architectural projects. My boss, Jake, he tried to be understanding at first. "Take it easy, Judy," he'd say. "We've got you covered." But as the weeks dragged on and I kept missing deadlines, I could see the frustration in his eyes. One day, he called me into his office. I knew what was coming. "Judy," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we can't keep giving you the big projects if you can't deliver. I'm thinking we should move you to remote work, maybe scale back your responsibilities." I threw myself a pity party that night. Sat on the couch Tom and I had picked out together, eating ice cream straight from the tub and crying my eyes out. But then, I felt it. This tiny flutter in my belly. And just like that, I knew. This child, this little miracle growing inside me, was more important than any building I could ever design. More important than any career. The next day, I started looking for a new job. Something closer to home, something that wouldn't stress me out so much. I found a small construction company, just a few blocks from my house. The pay was, well, let's just say it was a far cry from what I was used to. But they were willing to work with my schedule, to be flexible with doctor's appointments and all that. I took the job, and you know what? It was the best decision I could have made. The months flew by. When the big day finally came, I swear I could feel Tom there with me. Cheering me on, telling me I could do this. And I did. After what felt like a lifetime of pain and pushing, their perfect little human was. As I held him for the first time, this wave of love washed over me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Stronger than anything. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything for this little guy. Anything at all. I named him Thomas, after his dad. Tommy for short. And as I looked down at his sleeping face, I made another promise. I was going to give this kid the best life I possibly could. No matter what it took. The years flew by like pages in a flipbook. Before I knew it, Tommy was starting school, then middle school, then high school. And let me tell you, that kid was something else. Smart as a whip and athletic to boot. He'd come home with straight A's and trophies from track meets, grinning from ear to ear. "Look, Mom," he'd say, waving his report card or medal. "I did it." And every time, my heart would swell with pride. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. What more did we need? I made sure to be home when Tommy got back from school, to help with homework, to cheer him on at his meets. No late nights at the office for me, no sir. Tommy was my priority now. High school graduation came and went in a blink. Tommy, cap on his head and diploma in hand, beaming at me from the stage. I cried like a baby, of course. Couldn't help it. My little boy was all grown up. Then came college. Tommy got into a great school in another city. I was so proud of him, but man, it was hard to let him go. The house felt emptier than ever without him around. But you know what? It also gave me a chance to focus on myself again. I threw myself back into work, took on bigger projects. The money started flowing in again, and it felt good. I could help Tommy with his tuition, send him some extra cash for books and stuff. Every weekend, I'd hop in the car and drive to see him. We'd grab lunch, catch a movie, just hang out. It was different, sure, but it was still us. Still good. After graduation, Tommy decided to stay in the city. Got himself a good job and everything. I was happy for him, really I was. But a part of me missed having him close by. A few years went by like that. Me working hard, Tommy building his life in the city. Then one day, he called me up, sounding all excited. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "Her name's Sarah. She's amazing, Mom. I think she might be the one." I was thrilled for him, of course. All I ever wanted was for Tommy to be happy. And from what he told me, this Sarah sounded perfect. Smart, beautiful, from a good family. Tommy was head over heels. But then things started to change. Tommy called me up one day, out of the blue. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding a bit sheepish. "I was wondering, could you maybe help me out with buying a car? And, maybe send a bit more money each month? I want to take Sarah out, buy her nice things, you know?" I felt my heart sink a little. This wasn't like Tommy at all. He'd always been so responsible with money. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, "you know I'd do anything for you. But a car? And extra money for gifts? That's a lot to ask. You've got a good job. Why can't you save up for these things yourself?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was cold. "I thought you'd understand," he said. "I thought you'd want me to be happy. But I guess I was wrong." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd just been slapped. After that, things were different. Tommy didn't call as often. When he did, our conversations were short, stilted. It felt like there was this wall between us now, all because I wouldn't buy him a car or fund his lavish dates. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase. That Tommy would come around, realize that love wasn't about fancy cars or expensive gifts. But as the weeks turned into months, and the phone calls got fewer and farther between, I couldn't help but worry. A year passed in a blink. Then one day, out of the blue, Tommy showed up on my doorstep. He wasn't alone. "Mom," he said, grinning from ear to ear, "I want you to meet Sarah. We're getting married." Sarah was everything Tommy had described, pretty, polite, the works. But there was something off. The way she looked at me, it was like I was some quaint little curiosity. Still, I plastered on a smile and welcomed them in. "Oh, what a lovely home," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes roving over every inch of the place. "It's so charming and comfortable." They stayed for dinner, chattering about wedding plans. Sarah's parents were footing the bill, apparently. As they talked, I couldn't help but notice how different Tommy seemed. Gone was my down-to-earth boy. In his place was this stranger, all flash and no substance. The wedding was, well, it was something else. More like a coronation than a marriage ceremony. I felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by all these fancy folks in their designer duds. Tommy barely had time to say hello, too busy schmoozing with Sarah's family and friends. After that, I threw myself into work. Took on big projects, worked longer hours. The money started piling up, and I had this crazy idea. I'd design a house for Tommy and Sarah, build it from the ground up. A wedding gift, you know? But something held me back. I decided to wait, see how things played out. Months went by. Then one day, Tommy and Sarah showed up again. "Mom," Tommy said, "we've been thinking. This house is too big for you alone. Why don't we move in? Keep you company?" I was over the moon. I helped them move in, rearranged things to make room. It felt good, having life in the house again. But that feeling didn't last long. A month in, and Sarah started throwing her weight around. Ordering me around in my own kitchen, demanding fancy meals and expensive wines. "Look," I said one day, trying to keep my cool, "this is still my house. I appreciate you being here, but..." Sarah cut me off with a shriek. "Tommy, did you hear how she spoke to me?" And to my shock, Tommy yelled at me. At me, his own mother. After that, things got real cold. They barely spoke to me, like I was some kind of ghost haunting my own home. Then one night, I overheard them talking. "We need to get rid of her," Sarah was saying. "This house is wasted on her." "Yeah," Tommy replied, and my heart nearly stopped. Mom's had her time. Maybe we should look into nursing homes. I couldn't believe my ears. My own son, plotting to throw me out of my home? The home I'd designed, that I'd raised him in? I stepped around the corner, fury boiling in my veins. "How dare you," I spat. Tommy looked shocked, then guilty. But one glance at Sarah, and his face hardened. "Mom," he said, his voice cold, "I think it's time for you to leave." That was it, the last straw. Leave? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh no, sweetheart. This is my house, my name on the deed. If anyone's leaving, it's you too." Tommy's face went red. "But Mom..." "No buts," I cut him off. "Pack your bags. Both of you." They tried to argue, but I stood firm. This was my house, damn it. As I watched them drive away, bags piled in the back of their fancy car, I felt empty. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? The calm after the storm didn't last long. My phone started ringing off the hook, Tommy's name flashing on the screen every time. At first, I ignored it, but eventually, I picked up. "Mom," Tommy's voice was cold, calculated. "We need to talk about the house. It's half mine, by law. Dad left it to me too." I felt my blood pressure rising. "That's not true, Tommy. Your father left everything to me." "Well, I'm challenging that. I want half the value of the house. It's my right as Dad's son." He hung up on me, just like that. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like the world was spinning out of control. I'd been planning to build them a house, for crying out loud. A wedding gift, a fresh start. But now I didn't want to give them a damn thing. I called up Jack, Tom's old friend from law school. Explained the situation, my voice shaking. "Judy," Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're in the clear legally. Tom's will left everything to you. No contest." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But Jack wasn't done. However, he continued, "If Tommy decides to sue, well, it could get messy. Expensive. And drawn out." I spent the next few weeks in a daze. I kept hoping Tommy would come to his senses, that his conscience would kick in. But the phone calls kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. Then, one morning, I woke up to a commotion outside. I peeked out the window and felt my heart stop. There, on my front lawn, was a giant "for sale" sign. I ran outside in my robe, not caring what the neighbors thought. And boy, were they curious. "Judy, you selling the place?" Mrs. Peterson from next door called out. "Moving to be closer to your son?" Mr. Johnson asked, pausing his morning jog. I stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What could I say? That my son was trying to force me out of my own home? I tried calling Tommy, my fingers shaking as I dialed. Straight to voicemail. With a grunt of frustration, I yanked the sign out of the ground. It came up easier than I expected, nearly sending me tumbling backward. I dragged it into the garage, out of sight. Back in the house, I sank onto the couch, the same one where Tom and I used to sit, where I'd nursed Tommy as a baby. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. I was Judy Goddamn Miller. I'd designed skyscrapers, for Pete's sake. I'd raised a child on my own. I'd faced worse than this. I was trying to relax that evening, curled up on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, when I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. Was it Tommy, coming to his senses? But the voices I heard weren't just Tommy's. There were strangers in my house. I got up, my legs shaky, and made my way to the foyer. And there they were, Tommy, Sarah, and a couple I'd never seen before, all standing in my entryway like they owned the place. "And this is the living room," Tommy was saying, gesturing grandly. "Original hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows." The couple was nodding, looking impressed. "It's stunning," the woman said. "We'll take it. When can we move in?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quavering. "This house is not for sale. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave." Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. He turned to the couple and said, loudly, "Don't mind her. She's not well. Dementia, you know. Sad, really." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Tommy," I gasped. "How dare you?" But he talked over me, continuing his tour like I wasn't even there. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone. "I'm calling the police," I announced. "All of you, out. Now." The couple looked uncertain, glancing between me and Tommy. Finally, they mumbled some excuses and headed for the door. As they left, Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll never see Tommy again. Or your grandchild." That's when I noticed it, the slight swell of her belly under her designer blouse. My grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I barely noticed them leaving, the door slamming behind them. The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and sleepless nights. Tommy and Sarah, bankrolled by her parents, hired a team of slick lawyers. They threw everything they had at me, claims of mental incompetence, accusations of abuse against Tommy, you name it. I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Eventually, I had to quit my job, I just couldn't keep up anymore. One afternoon, as I was bringing in the mail, more legal documents, of course, my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came over. "Judy," she said, her kind face creased with concern. "Have you thought about going public with this? You know, telling your story on TV? Sometimes, sunlight is the best disinfectant." I brushed her off. It felt wrong, somehow, to air our dirty laundry in public. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Listen, you old fool," Tommy's voice crackled over the line. "Just give up already. You're embarrassing yourself." Something in me snapped. The next day, I called the local news station. It was time to tell my story. The TV interview aired, and for a few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, old friends, even a few lawyers offering their services. I ignored them all. I was tired, so tired. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, ready for another reporter, but instead found myself face to face with Sarah's parents. My heart sank. This was it, I thought. They're here to finish what Tommy and Sarah started. But to my shock, they looked ashamed. "Judy," Sarah's mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, we had no idea. We're so sorry." They came in, and over coffee, the whole story came out. They'd seen the TV interview, learned for the first time what their daughter and Tommy had been up to. The lawsuit, the attempts to sell my house, all of it. "We spoiled Sarah," her father admitted, shaking his head. "And now, well, she's always asking for money." They told me how they'd bought Tommy and Sarah an apartment. But Sarah had demanded a house instead. She said she'd handle it herself, her mother said, dabbing at her eyes. We had no idea this is what she meant. I sat there, stunned. I was going to build them a house, I said, my voice cracking. As a wedding gift. But after all this, I just can't. Sarah's parents nodded, understanding in their eyes. "We're cutting them off," her father said firmly. "No more money. Not for lawyers, not for anything." True to their word, they did just that. Without the financial backing, Tommy and Sarah's case fell apart. The lawsuit was dismissed, and just like that, it was over. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had given birth to a little girl. The thought made my heart ache. More time went by. I threw myself back into work, trying to rebuild the life that had been put on hold. Then one day, out of the blue, there was a tap on the door. It was Tommy. The moment I opened, he burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I was selfish and stupid, and God, Mom, I had no idea how hard it was to be a parent. What you went through, raising me alone." I stood there, watching my son cry, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally. "What you did, it's going to take time to get past that. But I'd like to meet my granddaughter." We worked out an arrangement. I'd babysit sometimes, buy clothes and toys for the baby. It was a start. The first time I held little Emma, I felt my heart melt. She had Tommy's eyes, my nose. She was perfect. Over time, things, well, they didn't go back to normal. I don't think they ever could. But they got better. Sarah became less demanding, even thanked me once for my help. Tommy, he was trying. Really trying. Do I forgive him? I don't know. Some days, when I'm playing with Emma, seeing Tommy's smile in hers, I think maybe I can. Other days, when the memory of what he did hits me, it feels impossible. But you know what? I'm not focusing on that right now. I'm just living, day by day. Enjoying my work, my home, my granddaughter. The future? Well, that'll sort itself out in time.